Hi everyone and welcome to my paper 2 walkthrough for Edexcel B Geography. Just like paper 1, I'm going to spend time going through the entirety of the paper. We're going to look at the paper itself, some structures I've put together to help via a PowerPoint, and I'm also going to model some answers to you as well. Other than that, just to point out that this is my own interpretation and inferences from the exam-borne materials, training I've attended, and 10 years of teaching experience. Other than that, just like paper 1, this is probably going to be quite lengthy, probably looking at an hour and a half, give or take. So I'm going to put thumbnails into the YouTube video. Please dip in and out. If you can't, sit and watch the entire video with the thumbnails, you can then choose what you want to watch, come back later, watch another segment until you watch the entire video. And I recommend everyone watches the entire video, especially on section C, the fieldwork. Other than that, there's some similarities and overlaps between paper 1 and 2. What I will point out that in terms of assess and evaluate questions, the overlap is definitely there between the two papers, and I won't go into as much detail on how to answer, assess, and evaluate questions. I spent a lot of time in paper 1 modeling that and going through how I visualize answering those questions. So if you didn't watch paper 1, skip back to paper 1. Again, I have thumbnailed it. Click on the thumbnails for assess and evaluate explanations. Watch them, then come back to this video. Okay, let's start and let's actually look at paper 2. So we've got paper 2 here, and what we should all be comfortable with is that paper 2, and let's just, skip over here so I can actually mark it up. Paper 2 here is your second paper, obviously, and it's on the UK geographical issues. Paper 1 was on global issues. This now specifies and it focuses on the UK itself. Just like paper 1 and paper 3, it's an hour and a half long. This is last year's exam. And I would always say this to you, that you should always read the information on the front of any exam. So first off, we can see that it's telling you that you need to answer all the questions in section A and B. So there's no choice within A and B. But, and this is super important, as students will have got this wrong on their mocks, there is a choice on section C. You've got C1, and C1 is all about physical field work. You will have either gone to the coast or to a river. Now, if you went to a coast, to a location, you'll be answering question 8. My geographers, you visited a river, Codden Mill Valley, so you are doing set question 9 in section C1. You also have a second choice, which is section C2, and you must either answer question 10, which is about dynamic urban areas. So if you visited a town or a city, you're doing set question 10. My geographers, question 10, as we did work around Nuneaton. And if you're from a different school and you visited a rural location in the countryside, such as a village, you'll be doing question 11. It is super important that you choose the correct options here. So again, for my geographers, we are looking at question 9 and question 10. Bullet point here, where you're asked, you must show all your working out and your answer clearly identified at the end of your solution. So any maths-based questions, working out gets you marks. Please circle or underline the answer so it's obvious to the examiner. Last little bit of information here. The total marks for this paper is 94. Marks are available for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Spelling, punctuation, grammar, and the use of specialist terminology. Talk about that a little bit further on. And then lastly, a bit of advice here, which is to read each question carefully from start to end and to check your answers at the end. Let's start looking at the paper. Okay, so as we can see here, we've got section A. Now, what I did in paper 1 is I kind of scanned through the entire paper before I got into any more detail. Now, what I'm going to do this time is just direct you all. So if we go to Google, and in Google, I'll actually show you this. just go to Google. If you put in Edexcel B GCSE Geography, click the top link, 2016, you're on the new specification. And if you've never been on the website before, you've got some tabs across the top here. And what you're looking for is course materials. Now, two things to point out for yourselves. Down here, you've got this sample assessment material. This is what your teachers will refer to as the SAMs. And if you click here, I'll show you, you actually get paper 1, 2, and 3. So this is basically a mock paper created by the exam board. Here's paper 1. We go a bit further. That's the mark scheme for paper 1. And then we get into paper 2. So if you're looking for a practice paper and the answers with that, you've got the SAMs. Go back to the website, and if you click on exam materials, you can actually access last year's papers. We're looking at paper 2 here. So if you would like to have a look through the paper now as I go through it, so you can pause my video, look at the exam paper. That's the paper you're looking to open, question paper 2 from June 2018. The mark scheme is also available here, and the examiner report is also available. Examiner report, super useful. If you open it, it'll basically go through the entire paper, and it's examiners using student responses from last year's exam, and they go through how many marks the student got on that question, and why and how they could have attained more marks if it's not full marks. So I'm not going to go through the entire paper like I did last time. We'll delve straight in, but you can access it yourselves now. Pause the video and have a scan through if you so wish. Okay, so paper 2 walkthrough here, and let's start looking at some information, an overview of where we're at. So this is the overview of GCSE Geography Edexcel B here, and you've all already sat, if you're watching this video, you should already have sat paper 1. Obviously, you might not be watching this just before your exams. If you are doing so, the likelihood is we've done this paper. Next, you're on to paper 2. So this is paper 2 here, and we're looking at the UK geographical issues. 3 sections. Section A is on the UK's evolving physical landscape. That's basically a bit of geology and a little bit of glaciation and a bit of relief, upland, lowland areas of the UK. It's only worth 8 marks overall. And then you've got 4, this is actually called topic 4 in the entirety of the specification. This is 4. 4A is coastal change and conflict, so that's your coasts topic, and 4B is river processes and pressures. That's basically one topic, section A. Section B is what we refer to as topic 5, and that's the UK's evolving human landscape. And you need to know a case study of a dynamic UK city. If you are a HLS geographer, you are looking at Birmingham here. Now, if you're from another school, there's a good chance that if you haven't done Birmingham, you're probably looking at London. And lastly, we've got our third section on this paper, section C, otherwise referred to as topic 6 across the specification and in revision materials like revision guides and Seneca. And this is where you'll have completed 2 pieces of fieldwork. You'll have done one on physical geography, one on human, and that'll be either at a river or coastline, or it'll be urban or rural. Again, already mentioned this, my geographers, you're doing river and urban, okay? This exam paper is worth 37, missing a little 0.5 there, stick the 5 there, 0.5%. It's 94 marks and it's an hour and a half. Same as paper 1 in length and how many marks it's worth and percentage. So moving on, still looking at the general overview here. So we're on paper 2, which is our UK geographical issues. And as I've just said there, section A, UK's physical landscape, it's worth 31 marks. So we're now breaking this down section by section. And you should spend 25 minutes on that. And there is 1 8 marker plus that 8 marker might have 4 marks, for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and the one that we forget about is specialist terminology. Okay, you're using specific GCSE geography terminology in your answer. Section B is the UK's evolving human landscape. Again, if we look at our marks, it's worth slightly less, set 27. We should spend 25 minutes on it. And again, it's got an 8 marker plus 4 for SPAG. Now, I've put 2 asterisks here. And that is because the specification says that the 4 marks for SPAG will be in section A. And that is true for the specimen, which is a mock that the exam board made in 2016. For the SAMS, which is a mock that the exam board made in 2017. However, in the last year's summer exam, June 2018, the 4 marks actually fell here. Okay, it was in section B. My point here is, look at the 8 markers. There will be a 4 marks available for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and specialist terminology in either section A or section B's 8 marker. So you will definitely get an A marker here and here, and one of these will have the 4 marks for SPAG. Lastly, section C1 and C2, physical and human fieldwork, 18 marks each, and you should spend 20 minutes, okay, on those sections, and they've both got an 8 marker, okay? All right, it's just really important here to look at how many marks fieldwork is worth and how much time they're expecting you to spend on it versus the other 2 sections. Fieldwork will play a massive role in your overall marks on this paper and the percentage you pick up. You must know it. Moving on. Okay, so quickly going through our assessment objectives. We did this in paper 1, paper 1's walkthrough. AO1 is just demonstrating your knowledge, okay? So it's just your knowledge of locations, places, processes, and environments. We've got AO2, which is you demonstrating your geographical understanding of concepts and interrelationships between people, places, and processes. AO3 is your application of knowledge. And this is where you are able to apply your knowledge through interpreting, analyzing, and evaluating geographical information and issues. Basically, you're able to take your knowledge and apply it to a resource, and then from that, you can make judgments, okay? Not just saying what you know. That's AO1 and AO2. It's applying it. And lastly, AO4 is the ability to select, adapt, and use a variety of skills and techniques to investigate questions and issues. Basically, this is all about your geographical skills and you applying that to these questions. This is a very much a different paper to paper 1. Let's have a look at the assessment objective spread for these papers. Paper 1 was largely here based more on AO1 and AO2, okay? Yes, I know what I've said there, there's a bit more here, but what I'm trying to say is in comparison to paper 2. Paper 2, AO1 is worth a lot less. AO2 is worth much less than paper 1. Okay, so my point here is paper 1 was much more about just you stating your knowledge, and there was much more case study presence in paper 1. Paper 2 is about the application of your knowledge, not just knowing case study knowledge or putting your knowledge on paper, it's applying it to resources. And you can see that AO3 is 14.2%, much more than paper 1's and more than paper 3's. And it's also got the biggest weighting, 10.8% on AO4, more than paper 1, more than paper 3. So this paper is all about applying your knowledge to a range of resources and using your skills to unpick those resources and making judgments from that. Okay, quick overview of question types, and then we'll be done with the overview and we'll delve into starting to look at the paper or last year's paper and me starting to model answers to you. So question types, just like paper 1, we're going to see some multiple choice, show open, open response questions, calculation, and extended open response. This is your assess questions and also your evaluate questions. You might want to pause the video here and just remind yourself about command words. So we've got identify, define, calculate, draw, plot, label, describe, compare. Stop there, compare questions, just to make us all aware again that this is where you must state the similarities and differences, okay, to get the mark. So whatever the question is, we're looking at similarities and differences. You must, okay, state those. Next, we've got on to our explain and suggest, and all of these here are point marked, okay, which I'm going to model to you. We'll talk about the difference between explain and suggest again. And if we go into our level marked, that didn't work. So let's go into our level marked command words. We've got assess and evaluate, which I will go back through briefly. Remember, more detail in paper 1 that you can jump back to. And there's no select and justify. That's in paper 3 only. So the spread in terms of mark tariff is how many marks these command words are worth. We can see that these command words are only worth 1 mark. We're starting to increase when we get across to 3 marks, compare and draw. Just to point out again, with compare, I would need 3 similarities and or differences. And then we're getting into higher marks. So 4 marks is going to be our suggest and explain. And then for this paper, 8 marks for assess and evaluate. And we've got no select and justify. Okay, so looking at our 8 markers, we are on paper 2 here, and section A and B will have an assess or evaluate question, and they're worth 8 marks, and they're 4 marks each for AO3 and AO4. Again, application of your knowledge to the resource, using your skills to unpick the resource, not just writing what you know. So if you just write what you know, which is AO2, you're going to drop marks here. And it's the same on C1 and C2. That's your physical and human fieldwork. You will get an assess or evaluate question, 8 marker. You're going to have 2 8 markers. And again, they are all about you applying your knowledge to the resource and issue at hand and unpicking it using your skills. So lastly here, just a quick overview of paper 2. And again, overview here of marks. You can have a quick read through of this if you so wish, but this is just summarizing what I've gone through. Okay. What I'd like to point out here, so this is again just a quick overview of section A and B. No choice of questions. Okay, you do everything that you're giving. Section C, should be comfortable here, is all about the fieldwork that you did. So you can see here from the exam board, what fieldwork did they actually do? You must be showing the examiners the fieldwork that you completed. You must know it. And section C again, C1, physical, river or course, my geographers, rivers. Section C2 is going to be dynamic urban or rural, my geographers, you're doing urban. So that's for my geographers questions 9 and 10. Lastly, to point out is that on the field work, you're going to get 2 8 markers, and they're going to be looking at what they refer to as familiar and unfamiliar. So there's 2 types of assessed questions here. One will be a familiar, and familiar means it's about the fieldwork you did. Unfamiliar will be where they give you a scenario or an issue where it's basically them coming up with a scenario of how some other students have collected fieldwork, and then they're expecting you to use your knowledge of fieldwork to deconstruct, unpick the unfamiliar scenario and evaluate it. Now, I'm going to do more work on that in a little bit. Okay, that's pretty much it for my overview. Last thing to point out, especially to my geographers, is just like paper one, you must know the command words and the structures we've gone through in class. This should be revised before the exam. Double check you've looked at your evaluate, distribution, do not need justify for paper three, assess, and the difference between describe and explain. Okay, let's get into exam command word practice here, and the difference between explain and suggest. Now, you'll see here that the explain and suggests questions could be worth 2 marks, 3 marks, or 4 marks. Okay, the major difference between the two of them is that suggest questions will always come with a resource. Okay, and they will expect you to start your points from the resource. Explain questions may or may not come with a resource, okay, but are just expecting you to develop your point. So you make a point and you develop it with a key phrase, like this leads to, this means that as a result. They're the key phrases that I want to see. Suggest questions, same idea, same principle. Point, develop it with this leads to, this means that as a result, a key phrase. But the difference between the two here is suggest will have a resource and you start your point from the resource itself. Okay, what I'm going to do then is spend a little bit of time just looking at some explain questions. I'll go through the first part of the 2018 exam, model some answers, and then we'll move into looking at the extended questions. Okay. Just give me a second. Okay. Right, sorry about this. I'm just going to have to focus. Nice. Visualizer's decided not to work. Let's reopen it. Sorry about this, everyone. Just give me a second. All right, so we're going to look at the exam in a second. All right, should be all right now. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is from the 2018 exam, and as I say, I'm going to look at the explain questions, but I thought I'd just point out as I go some other questions in the exam paper. So first off here, this was an exam, first exam question on last year's paper, and it said study figure 1, which is a photograph of a landscape in southern England, and it said identify which one of the following is the most likely rock type of this landscape. Bit of a silly question here, to be honest, but I thought we'd just quickly point this out. We're looking at granite, schist, chalk, and clay, and they'd given you this this image here where we can see this white horse. Now, we may or may not have been aware of what this was, but in terms of rock type, we can see the rock's white, and the only one of these four that is a white rock is chalk. So my point here is, whilst it may have thrown some of you in the summer, if you sat this exam, if you get a similar question to this this summer, just look carefully at the image, use a bit of common sense here, okay? Look for the giveaway in the image and how that could connect to the actual question. Okay, let's actually have a look at an explained question now. So first off, in the exam, as per every exam question you do, let's circle, underline, or highlight the command word explain here. Explain means I need to make a point and then I need to develop it. And to develop it, you need to use key phrases. And the three that I love are this leads to, this means that, or as a result. This leads to allows you to explain, to make connections. This means that is particularly good for starting to analyze, and as a result is good for being evaluative. Okay, so I prefer to use these three key phrases to develop our points. Now it's worth 2 marks, so I only need to make 1 point developed. So I just need 1 point developed. Okay, so explain one difference in the climate. So that's the weather that we usually find in a place over an extended period of time of uplands and lowlands. It's asking me explain one difference explained in why upland and lowland areas in the UK have different climates. So I'm going to go with one difference. So I'm using the language of the exam question to begin my answer. I'm not rewording the whole thing. You don't need to do that, but I'm just using the language in a slight manner to begin the sentence for my 2 marker. So one difference is that upland areas have more snow and I'm going to use a key phrase here, which I'm just going to put in a different colored pen. Which I do not have. Give me a second. Oh. Oh. All right, scrap that. Let's start that again. All right. I'm going to start that again. So, one difference. Apologies about that. One difference is that upland areas experience lower temperatures. And then I'm going to develop my point, and because I can't find another color, I'm going to just highlight it. This means that, so I'm developing my point there. They experience precipitation falling as snow more often. Just had to, I didn't word this very well initially, so I reworded it. So we've got one difference is that upland areas experience lower temperatures. That's my point. Then I've developed it with a key phrase. This means that they experience precipitation falling as snow more often. And that's my development. So basically I'm saying upland areas have more snow, which is true. Okay, it's the difference between upland and lowland areas in terms of their climate in the UK. All right, let's move on. Next, I've got a question from section A still. Well, this is what we're doing section A. And this is looking at coastal change now. So the first set of questions here are all on topic 4. Topic 4 being just geology and glaciation and understanding of upland and lowland areas of the UK. And then we're now into section A still, but it's now looking at 4A, coastal change and conflict. Just wanted to point out this question as it tripped quite a few students up, and you may get something similar. It says study figure 2. So clearly the answer here comes from looking at the image. And it's a photograph of the coastline of Suffolk looking northwards. The examiners are giving you information in the resource. Pay particular attention to it. They've gone out their way to give us our compass rose here, so we know where north is. Question here, identify which one of the following is the most likely direction of sediment moving along this coastline? East to west, north to south, south to north, west to east. Now, they're expecting you to think about the language in the question and to use the compass rose. Here, we can see that there is more sediment on this side of the groin, which is telling me that longshore drift is operating in this direction. So it's going from using the compass direction supplied to me from south to north, because more sediment is being trapped on the southerly side, and that's what groins are designed to do. So my answer here would be south to north. Point here, resources have been particularly chosen by the examiners, and they're giving you hints here, looking northwards, giving us a compass direction. Use it, think about it, look carefully at resources. Remember, this paper is all about you having to apply your knowledge to the resources and also deconstruct using your geographical skills. Okay, let's go back to explain. So I've got another explain question here, and we've got explain why there is an increasing risk of coastal flooding on many UK coastlines. Again, always highlight, circle the command word, which is explain. Before I go any further, my little man, my little 2-year-old's leaving, so I'm just going to shout bye to him. Sorry, everyone. Are you going out, Quinn? All right. Are you going out? No, just going in the garden. All right. Enjoy. Okay. Bye, Quinny. Right. Sorry about that, everyone. Back to this then. So, first off, circle or highlight the command word, which is explain. It's worth 4 marks this time. So, it's not describe, it's not state, which means I must develop my points. So here, again, we need to make points and we need to develop them. And we're going to develop them using key phrases, such as this leads to, this means that, and as a result. Now, it's worth 4 marks. So this means I need 2 developed points. Or, because it hasn't broken it down, it hasn't said to me that I need to explain it in 2 ways, or give me a numbered numbers here to state to me that I need 2 points. I can get this via 1 point developed 3 times. So that would be like point, develop it, okay, make a new point, develop it, make another point, develop it into my last point. So I could get it this way. So point, develop 1, 2, 3 times, give me a 4 mark answer. I'm going to show you this setup here, but you could also do it just 2 developed points, which some students might find easier to attain the 4 marks. So explain why there's increasing risk of coastal flooding on many UK coastlines. I'm just going to start it with brief, picking out brief language from the question. There is increasing flood risk. I don't want to write the whole thing out, just brief. Due to climate change. All right, there's my initial point. I've got a mark. Let's develop it using one of my key phrases. I'm going to use this leads to. This leads to an increase in sea level rise. There's my second. So I've done this so far. I've gone point. I've used a key phrase that's highlighted. This leads to. And now I've made a third point. I can tick that off. I need to develop it again. I'm going to use a different key phrase. This means that storm surges occur more often. Key phrase, this means that. Back to this, I've developed it and I've made a point about storm surges. Now let's get my last mark here. So I need to develop it again. Back to my key phrase list. I'm going to use as a result. As a result, there is an increase in coastal erosion and flooding. And I've developed it again with as a result. Tick that off. And I've made a final point about there being more coastal erosion and thus leading to more flooding. If I was to mark this, there's my initial point. There's one mark. I've developed it into my point about sea level rise, second mark. Developed it again into my point about more storm surges, third mark. And then I've developed again into my last final point, which is linking back to the exam question, talking about coastal flooding in the end via erosion. There's my 4 marks, 4 out of 4. We'll do one more explain question. So as I turn this over, we can see that I'm still on section C, but now I've moved over, section A, ignore that. I'm still on section A, obviously, but now I'm on to the final part of section A, which is looking at topic 4B, which is river processes and pressures. It's super important here that you notice this change. It should go course to rivers. If it goes the other way around, like they start with rivers and go into course, just look at the heading at the top of the page in bold, because what we've found is a handful of students would write here about course still, okay? And there's a question at the bottom, which I'm not going to do, but I'll point it out. It says, explain one reason why high discharge is likely to increase erosion. And we got students writing about erosional processes, hydraulic action, attrition, abrasion, corrosion, in terms of a coastline here. Now, that shouldn't happen because of the hydrograph above, but they would have picked up marks with the answers if they had applied it to rivers. So just look for when the change occurs and write appropriately for that change. You need a change to your river subject knowledge. Okay, last one to do here on explain, and then we'll move on. Again, in the exam, highlight, circle, box your command word, explain. I've got, therefore, to ensure that I'm making points that are developed. So you make a point and you develop it, and I'm going to develop it using my key phrases. And again, my key phrases, this leads to, this means that, as a result. This question's worth 4 marks, but it's different, which is why I'm pointing it out to the previous explain, because they have bolded the phrase to, and they've given me a clear indicator that they want 2 different points. So this time, it has to be times 2 points developed. I can't do it where I develop 1.3 times like I did in the previous question. What I'd say here is in this question, I'd start my 2 points with firstly and secondly. That clearly shows the examiner that you're using 2 different ways. And also if your answers spill further down past the indicated number, i.e. your first point comes to about here, maybe you've got big handwriting, and then your second point is going to creep down to here. Start it firstly, secondly, So it's obvious to the examiner where you start one point and you start your second point. Okay, last thing to point out here, it says human activities, how they affect storm hydrographs. Storm hydrographs indicate flooding. So this question, in a longabout way, was saying, how do humans cause flooding? Okay, or how can humans affect the likelihood of flooding, positively or negatively? When you get questions like this, just think to yourself, what is the examiner's trying to get me to show off here? It's got to be something that you've revised. So if you're thrown by the wording, take a step back. What have you been taught that is relevant? Have a look back at the resource prior. Okay, you'll have done hydrographs in class. They're all about thinking about the causes that increase or decrease likelihood of flooding. So this question here is two ways humans, and again, look carefully. If it says human, it's got to be about humans. If it's physical, it's natural. So you cannot get anything here for natural reasons. So firstly, humans cause deforestation. Develop my point. There's my first point. Develop it. This means that there is an increase in surface runoff to the river's channel. You could tag on here, okay, about therefore increasing likelihood bankful discharge, okay, but I've made an initial point and I've developed it. There's my development. This means that. Let's do another one. Secondly, humans increase impermeable surfaces via urbanization, i.e. growth in our towns and cities and the proportion of people living in them. This means that, I've just used that again. I could have used as a result of this leads to a decrease. This means that there is a decrease in infiltration. So more water reaches the river's channel. Again, I've developed my point here. This means that. So my initial point here, first humans cause deforestation. That would get a mark. This means that there's an increase in surface runoff. I could have just put that there's a decrease in interception here. So basically more water is getting to the Earth's surface and therefore running off into the river's channel, which will affect the amount of water in the river, and therefore it's hydrograph. There's 2 marks. Second one here, I've started with secondly, humans increase impermeable surfaces via urbanization, mark. This means that there's a developed point, there's a decrease in infiltration. So I could have put decrease in infiltration or increase in surface runoff. So more water reaches the river's channel, mark. So overall here, that would get me 4 marks out of 4. Okay. Just to point out here is, do not be tempted to kind of flip or reverse points. So here's an example. I could have said, firstly, humans cause deforestation, which means that there's a decrease in interception, which leads to more water getting to a river's channel. I could kind of flip it and make a similar point, which is secondly, humans can cause afforestation and therefore increase interception and decrease the amount of water getting to a river's channel. Good, they're both valid, they're both human activities, but they're too similar, okay? So what I would say is, don't offer answers in slightly different guises. Make sure your 2 points are clearly different, okay? I don't want one about urbanization and then another one about, I don't know, rural settings. So make it clearly obvious. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right. Just give me a second. Okay, last thing to point out here, and actually I'm going to have to skip back to the exam paper, is last thing on explain questions is in this paper too, is looking at using examples in the 4-mark questions. Now, what we mean by that is this is taken from the Psalms. You can see there's a 4-marker and it says, for a named river, explain why it floods. And they're asking you to name a river. To get 4 marks here, you must, name a river and you must use factual information from that river. So for my geographers, this is looking at you explaining why the River Parrett flooded, and we'd be looking at you using 2 developed points here or a point developed 3 times. But within your answer, you must have named factual information from that case study or that named example. As another example, and apologies, I'm going to skip back to the exam paper. In fact, what we'll do is we can just look at it here. So if we come down to section B, I'm now on to the UK's evolving human landscape. And we keep going here. As I say, we've got the UK's evolving human landscape. This is topic 5 overall. And your case study on here is Birmingham, or if you're not one of my geographers, whatever city you studied, okay? Likelihood is it'll be Birmingham or London. Now, at the end of this section, so this is section B, scroll back up, keeps jumping. Here we go. So at the end of this section, you're going to get 2 4 markers into an 8 marker. So this is section B on topic 5, the UK's evolving human landscape. You're going to finish that on an 8 marker. And I'm going to speak about these 8 markers once I've finished talking about explain questions. And the section will finish on an 8 marker. But before that, you're going to get 2 4 markers. And these 4 markers will be about your named city, okay? And you can see here I've got a question for a named UK city. Explain 2 reasons why the functions, okay, so that's how it's used, okay, thinking about employment and economic activities, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary jobs. So why the functions of its inner city areas have changed in recent years. You're going to have to name your city. So here's Birmingham. And it's worth 4 marks. So you need 2 developed points. So I'm going to have 1 point and develop it. I'm going to start it with that phrase firstly. And then I'm going to make a 2nd point and develop it. And I'm going to start that with secondly, which we just did. But to get 4 marks here, you must be ensuring that you are using a piece of case study knowledge or named example knowledge. It doesn't have to be in super depth. So here's an example. My first point could be about Longbridge, okay? So I'm naming an area of Birmingham that has changed in its function. So Longbridge has been regenerated from it was a car factory, a site of a car factory, and it's been regenerated into a shopping centre and high street. Okay, so it's gone from secondary to tertiary. So that is going to be one change of function. Secondly, my other one could be that in the inner city areas of Birmingham have experienced deindustrialization. Now, that's happened in majority of UK cities. To make it more specific to Birmingham, I'm going to say that as a result, 50,000 people have experienced job losses at that time. So the mention of Longbridge and car factory site closing and being regenerated, and the amount of people losing their jobs due to deindustrialization, there is just 2 facts that would elevate my answer to allow me to get 4. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to attain full marks. And there will always be at the back end of this section B 2 4 markers like this. Here's the second one for a named UK city, and again it's worth 4 marks, but this time you could get it with 2 developed points, as there's no asking for 2 ways, or a point developed 3 times. But to get that, again, you need to be bringing in specific examples from your named city. Now, let's go back to the PowerPoint and look at our assess questions. So, assess questions and evaluate questions. Again, on this exam, these are your essay questions. And like we've already said, 1 at the end of section A, 1 at the end of section B, 2 in section C, 1 at the end of physical, 1 at the end of human fieldwork. Now, assess questions, I'm not going to get into them in detail here. Go back to watch paper 1. It's now thumbnailed in the HLS Jog YouTube channel, but they are asking you to consider all the factors that you introduce to the answer and identify which are the most important. Remember, we need 3 factors. So whatever the exam question is, you need to break it down into 3 different factors, 3 different ideas, 3 different points. You need to develop each one, and you're basically weighing up which ones are the most important to whatever that key terminology of the exam question is. Now, this is the structure that I would like to see for each of those 3 points. So you've got 3 ideas, 3 different factors that'll help you answer the question, and you're weighing them up, you're assessing them. Each one, I would like it to be point, evidence, explanation, and link. So make a point, and you might want to start that first point with the most important point is, second most important, least. Evidence here is not going to be case study knowledge on paper 2, but it's going to be from the resource. And I like the phrase, this is evident by. So use that phrase. So you're kind of signposting to the examiner, you're using evidence from the resource. So point, this is evident by. Use information from the resource. Use your subject knowledge to explain the evidence you provided. And again, use my key phrases, this means that, and as a result. And then you're going to link back to the question, that's the L. So you link back to the key geographical phrase and see how important that point is. And you use the phrase, this is minimally or averagely, massively, greatly significant. Significant means importance. Because, quick sentence here. If you need more help again on assess structures, I model and visualize this in paper 1's walkthrough. Pause here, go back, thumbnail, watch it, come back. Quick overview again, and I'll just go to animations here to help. So this is our answering assess structure. You're going to have factor 1 or idea 1, and this is going to be your first paragraph, and whatever is the most important or the most important point in terms of that question. Then factor 2, second most, paragraph 2. Third factor, least important, third paragraph. And then I want a quick little mini conclusion, 2 to 3 sentences long, that's it. You make an overall judgment that links back to the question, i.e. you're answering the question at the end. Again, we use the Peel structure here. And each of these paragraphs is going to be a Peel structure. And what I would ask you to do is at the beginning of this paragraph, and this paragraph, you use a reflexive phrase. Okay, so it shows the examiner that you're weighing up different factors. So, for example, after I've done factor 1, my first paragraph, I might start factor 2 with nevertheless, to show the examiner I'm starting a new idea and I'm weighing it up versus the previous. And then I might get onto my third paragraph and use in contrast. So I'm showing them that I'm weighing up the third idea versus my prior 2. And then I think the obvious thing to do in the last paragraph is, when you do your mini conclusion here, is to say in conclusion, giving the examiner obvious signposting that you are finishing and coming to an overall judgment linked back to that exam question. Okay, this is really important. Okay, biggest takeaway from this walkthrough is the difference between paper 1 and paper 2's assess questions. These questions in paper 2 are what I'm going to refer to as analyze and assess questions. Okay, they're different to paper 1's because 1, they use those command words. They say analyze and then assess, and 2, they use a resource. So they will come with a resource, and they're expecting you to analyze and then assess said resource. Unlike paper 1's, which is more about you bringing in case study knowledge, that's not the case. This is all about AO3 and AO4, you applying your knowledge to a resource, unpicking it with your skills. Okay, so analyze and assess, slight tweaking to how I want you to go about looking at the exam question. First off, I want you to box, underline, or highlight the command words, okay, which will be analyze and assess. 2, I want you to box, underline, and highlight the key geographical phrase, okay? And then lastly, I want you to plan what 3 factors you're going to use in the answer. And I would do so by annotating the question. If we go to the exam and we have a look at one of these, let's go up to this question here. So the end of section A and the end of section B will have a analyze assess question. Now, pinch of salt here, the SAMS specimen and June 2018, so the 2 mocks made by the exam board and the 2018 exam, they all had analyze and assess questions, okay? And they all came with resources. Now, they could, and it is mentioned in the specification, they could use evaluate instead, which I'll touch upon. But so far, all question 4's last question of section A and question 7's last question of section B have been 8 mark, analyze and assess. So first off, let's circle our command word analyze, and then let's scroll down a little bit and you'll see that the exam question comes after and says assess. So this is what I mean by analyze and assess questions. You can see it came with a resource. There it is. And underneath, I'm going to underline the key geographical phrase, which is about precipitation on land use. Don't forget, precipitation can be snow, hail, sleet, or rain here. So we've got analyze and assess, and our structure is highlight those command words, underline the key geographical phrase, precipitation on land use. They want you to keep going back to that. And then third off, we're going to plan our answer. So I would like you just to annotate what your 3 different ideas are going to be, and then your 3 factors, your 3 ideas for your 3 different paragraphs. Now, if I go back to the peel paragraphs, this is where, in terms of your peel, when you link back to the question here, or I come back here, this is our structure. The point is going to be your initial point. The evidence comes from that resource. Explanation is you explaining it with your subknowledge, but your link back to the key geographical phrase and how significant it is means that at the end of these 3 peel paragraphs, you're going to link it back to how important your point is in relation to precipitation or land use. And you need to use that language at the end of each of your paragraphs. So whatever the key geographical phrase is, that should be the language you use at the end of each peel paragraph to link it back to the question and say how important the point is you've made is in relation to that. Now, to help with analyze and assess, I would like us to follow the following structure. Okay. Right, so just setting this up for you. Hand wrote this for speed today. Had a rather fussy sun this morning, so didn't have as much time as I hoped. So Hopefully we can see this. Now, what I would like us to do is when we get these analyze and assess questions is to follow said structure. Okay. All right, so we've got analyze and assess questions, and these are going to be on paper 2, as I've said, end of section A, question 4, end of section B, question 7. They're going to ask you to analyze. Now, what that means is we're not expecting case study knowledge, and it does not presume locational knowledge. What that means is they don't expect you to know about Scotland. So this question we're looking at now was all about Scotland, but they don't expect you to know, have loads of knowledge about Scotland. It's about you applying what you've been taught in class to the question. So to analyze, before we get to the second command word, assess, we need to deconstruct. We need to unpick the resources provided, and that is where you're showing AO4. You're showing off your key geographical skills you've learned across Key Stage 4 geography and before that. There's 3 ways that I think you should deconstruct, and I would go through these 3 ways on the actual exam paper by annotating the resource. So first off, you've been taught T in class. Now, if you're not one of my geographers, we expect our students to look at a resource and to point out what their trends are. So what is the overall obvious pattern? What is your evidence to support that trend or that general pattern? And can you pick out any anomalies, any obvious anomalies that do not fit that pattern? So when you get the resource, tee it up. General trend, what's the evidence, the best evidence available to support that general trend, and what are your anomalies, okay? The second way, okay, to deconstruct is to look for similarities and differences within the resource or between resources. So this question 4 gave me 2 maps, and I could look for similarities and differences to help deconstruct, unpick the resources and provide me with points. And lastly, what about extremes? Have a look carefully at the resource. Is there any extremes in there? Extreme data, okay, extreme examples that you could use in your answer. Once you've deconstructed via 1, 2, 3, we're now going to assess the question. And these are going to be what formulates your 3 Peel paragraphs. So the structure answer, and we've gone through this, 3 Peel paragraphs, and the points, your 3 points come from your deconstruct. So from looking carefully at trends, evidence, anomalies, similarities, differences, and extremes, you're going to start a point from that deconstruct. You're going to use evidence from the resource. This is evident by quote it. You're going to use your subject knowledge to explain said evidence, and then you're going to link back to the key geographical phrase. Now, let's go back to the PowerPoint and the question paper. So if this was me in the exam, I'd be going through my T, my similarities, differences, and extremes, okay? So straight away, I'd be looking for similarities, okay? So one obvious similarity here, and it's going to give me my trend here, is that, and I'm going to use the evidence from the resource, that where there's precipitation above 3001 millimeters, i.e. a lot of precipitation, we have poor quality farmland, okay? So there's a general trend, and I've used T here, evidence, and I've also looked at evidence from the map. I can also see, actually, though, on some of these Scottish islands here, is that we've got some anomalies here where actually here, even though they've got higher precipitation in this area, there's actually some better farmland, okay? It's medium quality. So I'm using that deconstructing process. I'm looking for other patterns here. Okay, so I can see here and here. Okay, I've got another pattern here that as I move eastward, I get lower precipitation levels, which result in better farmland. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is to look at other patterns here. These are my urban areas, and I can see that the urban areas are located near better farmland, which is also where there is less rainfall. Then I'm going to think about, well, there's some trends, there's some patterns. I can use evidence that on one coast there is more precipitation, poorer farmland, on the other coast, better farmland, lower precipitation. I can pull out that some anomalies in the data here and extremes. But I need to think about why as well. Well, the subject knowledge here is going to be me thinking about, well, what do I know about Scotland? Well, it's upland, it's higher altitude. Okay, therefore there's an increased amount of precipitation, especially in terms of snowfall. From lessons you'll have learned that these are the Northwest Highlands, the Cairngorms and Grampians, the southern uplands. So where it's more mountainous, there's higher precipitation, there's worse farmland. Where it's less mountainous, okay, towards the coastlines, we are getting better farmland and lower precipitation levels. Where it's generally flatter and lower precipitation is where we get those urban areas of Edinburgh and Glasgow. So from this, you should be able to bring in subject knowledge. Okay, so first you deconstruct, and then when we come to the exam question, you're going to create 3 points from that deconstruct. Now, here we've got an answer from last year's exam. This is provided by the exam board. So this student has made 2 points here. Now, they've got 7 out of 8. I'm going to say that we all make 3 points. But what I want to do here is just to show you where they're using evidence and where they've obviously deconstructed, i.e. they're showing trends, they're showing anomalies, they're thinking about similarities, differences, and extremes. So let's go with evidence here is going to be orange, and my deconstructed resource is going to be in pink here. So the higher average precipitation, the lower quality of the farmland. So that is deconstruction from the resource. That's their point, but they've clearly deconstructed the resource to get there. Areas with 3001 millimeters. This is evidence from the resource. This is your peel. And above average make for the poorest quality farmland. Okay, so there we go. He or she, apologies, have made a point which is deconstructed from the resource and provided evidence. That's PE or peel. They're then going to go on to try to explain it using their subject knowledge. So this is the explain section of peel. And they put being most likely they're thinking about their subject knowledge, mountainous. They might not even know it's mountainous, but they're using their subject knowledge to try to explain why there would be higher precipitation rates and poor farmland. Being most likely mountainous highlands that are difficult and inconvenient to inhabit, lower precipitation areas, unlike higher ones on the left side, are protected from winds across the ocean by the land masses. So what they're trying to explain here is why we get this pattern using their subject knowledge. Okay, if we go further down, well, they've done another deconstruct here, their initial point. The lower precipitation areas are mostly either good quality farmland or urban areas. And then they're going to go on and give me some evidence here. So here it is. This is their evidence. And then they're trying to explain it with their subject knowledge with this makes sense. So there's your point, evidence, explain. Point, evidence, explain. point from deconstructing the resource. Think T, similarities, differences, extremes. Bring that in to make the initial points in your paragraphs. And then you're going to evidence it from the actual resource. And then you're going to use your knowledge to attempt to explain said evidence. I would like 3 paragraphs. This person scored 7 out of 8 with 2. I think that a 3rd paragraph would definitely have netted them that third, that final mark. Follow that structure. Moving on. So if we go back to the actual PowerPoint here, then, and the last thing I would like to point out then is that in terms of our assess and analyze, or analyze and assess questions, this is just taken from the exam board here. You can see that they're asking students to deconstruct the resource before making their assessment. So you can't come up with your 3 ideas, your 3 points. You can't try to answer the question before you've torn apart the resource. It's the tearing apart the resource that guides the points you make. Look, you can see here that they're asking you to do AO4. Use your skills to tear apart the resource before you come up with your points. Okay, moving on. Last thing I want to say about analyze and assess is just showing you examples from section B, which is all about topic 5. So on section A, you will get a 8-mark analyze assess, or should be analyze and assess, which again it'll be worth 8 marks, and it'll be question 4. And then at the end of section B, you're going to get another 8-mark analyze and assess, and it should be analyze and assess again with a resource, and that's going to be question 7. And this is all about topic 5, which is your evolving UK human landscape. What I've got here is the 3 examples that have been produced by the exam board. First one is taken from our specimen. Second one, the SAM. So these are mocks made by the exam board. And lastly here, we've got, actually, apologies, let's get rid of the last one. So we've got one here, second one here. So these are both from that section B. Now, if I move here, this is the one from June 2018. So ignore this one here. We've just gone through that, but we've got 3 examples from question 7 about topic 5, the evolving human landscape. Last question on section B. This, again, we should circle where it says analyze, circle where it says assess, and before you do anything, tear apart that resource, deconstruct it. It's giving you information here. Read the information carefully, look at what else is provided, look at what it's centered upon here, and then deconstruct. 1, use T. 2, look for similarities and differences. That's meant to be an S. And 3, looks for extremes. Once you've done that, use that to plan your 3 points. And you're going to come down here, and we know that we're looking at here, you looking at the key geographical phrase, which is the variations in the distribution. So distribution means how spread out something is. So basically here it's looking at how spread out the amount of people born outside of the UK are in the map provided. So we're looking at every Peel paragraph going back to the variations in the distribution, the variation in how spread out those people are. This wasn't done particularly well, and the reason was, 2 seconds. Quinny, come here. My son has come to say hi. Quinn, Daddy is working. Do you want to come here? Come here. Say hi to everyone.
Hi.
Say go hi.
Hi.
Say my name's Quinn.
My name is
Quinn, good boy. Are you going to go back outside with Mummy?
Daddy.
Thank you. Why? Why you got your chef's hat on?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're talking.
What are you cooking?
Yeah,
Been
doing.
Oh, you've been drawing, have you? Well, Daddy needs to get back on with work, so we need to go back to Mummy. Say bye.
Bye.
Oh, that's Daddy's. Right, Mummy.
Let's go.
Go on, back to Mum. Right, cuddle Daddy. Oh. Right, back in a sec. Say bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. You little cutie. Come on, back out.
Let's go.
Mommy.
No, not tomorrow. Is
My book.
get your boot quickly. Go back downstairs with Mummy. Bye, Quinn. All right. Bye. Back to this. Sorry, everyone. Celebrity appearance there from Quinn Eden himself. Right, so once we've deconstructed, little Quinny has moved me on. Right, so we've deconstructed, but this question was done poorly, and reason being is students struggle to explain the distribution because of their just general level of UK geographical knowledge. So if you get a similar question to this, first off, we should know our 4 countries of the UK, so we should be comfortable with Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England. So straight away, we can see that this exam board have chosen to give us just England and just Wales, okay? We haven't been given Scotland, we haven't been given Northern Ireland. So there, you know that when you talk about the variation of distribution, how spread out something is, here, how spread out people born outside the UK, living in the UK are, then you should be referencing England and Wales. They've purposely selected not to use Scotland and Northern Ireland, so you should have picked that, been able to pick upon that. Next, let's learn some regions, okay, of England. So northeast, northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber, East and West Midlands, east of England, you've got London, southeast, southwest. So pause this video in a second and learn regions. So over here, when we're talking about variations, you could see here there's a lack of people in the northeast born from outside of the UK. Looking at Wales, there's also a lack of people here. Yorkshire and the Humber has got a lack of people. Flip it the other, southwest here, lack of people. Flip it the other way, we've got London, which we can see, which surprisingly was the only real geographical location used by students in this exam because it was given, but you should know more than the given in this exam question. But we could have referred to the fact that there was more born down here in the southeast, okay, and maybe touched upon certain other areas. Next, learn some key geographical cities. So here's a map of some key geographical cities, and I would say right now, pause and learn this. Learn countries, regions, and cities. Because if we go back to the map here, we can see in the northeast that purple is Newcastle. Here, this prominence in the northwest of purple on the chloropleth map, this here is this clustering of Manchester, Liverpool through to Leeds, okay, maybe not on Sheffield. Here, these dark purple elements are your Coventry and Birmingham, okay? So if you know your key cities in the UK, it will help you apply that knowledge. Remember, this is all about applying your knowledge to the resources. They want you to have a working understanding of UK countries, regions, cities. Okay, that's why they weren't given other than London, and students who only picked out London, spoke about London, got less marks here. On topic 5, which is all about the UK's evolving human landscape, question 7 is likely going to have a similar resource. So learn your countries, regions, and cities right now. Pause it, learn it, flashcard it, come back to it. Okay, you've got a map in your organizers as well. All right, that is me done with analyze and assess questions. Here, you may want to pause it to read the level descriptors, but you can see at the bottom here, they talk about a balanced, well-developed argument, okay, that synthesizes relevant understanding, i.e. deconstructing information, which is mentioned here, from the resource, which we've gone through, and is supported by evidence from the resource, which we've gone through throughout, i.e. every paragraph has a piece of evidence, and that this allows them to make arguments. Do my peel paragraph structure, deconstruct in the way we've seen, set it out in that structure, and you will do well on these questions. Last thing to point out here on extended questions before we get into the third section, section C, which is evaluate. Now, on the SAM specimen, the 2 marks made by the exam board, and also on the June 2018 exam, there's only been one evaluate question. And if I skip back here, sorry, just double checking we're still recording. So there's only been one evaluate question. The rest have been assess. So I just want to point out, quickly go over what we mean by evaluate if it comes up. And this is where you're basically making an argument. That's all evaluate means, an argument. And you're making 2 sides of an argument into a conclusion. Side 1, side 2, conclusion. 3 paragraphs, 3 peel paragraphs. And you must come to a definitive judgment or conclusion. So this is the structure I like. Remember, it's an argument. So you're going to do, on one hand, it's going to be your first paragraph, and it's the first side of your argument. Then you're going to do, on the other hand, start your paragraphs with those phrases. On one hand, on the other hand, you're going to give me another side of an argument, and then you're going to go into your conclusion. And I would start that with overall, okay, overall. So we've got 3 O's here. And on the conclusion, you're going to succinctly summarize the evidence you've presented for both sides, and you're going to make a substantiated judgment as to which side you are on and why. Justify your decision. So evaluate questions are on one side of the argument, on one hand, on the other side of the argument, on the other hand, peel paragraph, then you're going to go into overall, summarize the evidence you provided, say which side that you're on. And these 3 paragraphs, on one hand, on the other hand, overall, are as long as each other. It is not assess where you give me a 2-3 sentence conclusion. I need a proper, weighty, developed conclusion. Do not bring anything new into the conclusion. It has to be based upon what you've presented in your first 2 paragraphs. Again, just to mention here, start each of your paragraphs with a reflexive phrase, but as I've said, the ones that I prefer here are on one hand, on the other hand, overall. And again, each of these is a peel paragraph. This is peel, this is peel, this is your overall. Last 2 slides on evaluate, some ideas to make arguments. So what could your 2 sides of the argument be? Look at the question, and could you break it down into costs versus benefits? Or could you just break it down to side 1 is all about advantages versus disadvantages, or strengths versus weaknesses? So could you break it down to those arguments? Or, a bit more technical, what about looking at it in the short term? So maybe the days, weeks, months afterwards versus long term, years, decades after. So short term versus long term. What about scale, right? Geographers, we love scale. What about looking at it on a small scale? So looking at it, maybe the impacts just in a local area or a regional area, larger scale, national or global, okay? What about looking at stakeholders or players, people affected who would have an opinion on what we're studying? So maybe take 2 players or group the players, okay? People that live locally versus the CEO, someone who actually runs a company. So you could break it into stakeholders. Or last one, you could think SEEP, okay? S stands for social geography. That's social. E is your economic. E, your environmental. Again, notice in environmental, we've mentioned this before, the N in the center of that word. P, political. So could you break it into 2 parts of SEEP? So could we do social versus political? Other one here, economic versus environmental factors. Last one here that I've not got on here, you could do sustainable, i.e. meets the needs today and in the future, versus unsustainable. So what is sustainable and unsustainable? Make two arguments from that. That's evaluate. And lastly here, I've just got a list of some other ideas. Last bit here is that I'd mention, what about reversible versus non-reversible? So one side could be that whatever you're looking at could be reversed, and non-reversible obviously means it's permanent. So you could do it reversible versus permanent argument. Pause it here if you would like to have a read through the actual mark scheme. These are the levels to get level 3, 7 to 8. Again, you must deconstruct information, make a balanced, well-developed argument, and comes to judgments supported by evidence. Hence Peel. And if this becomes a analyze and evaluate, do what I said for analyze, assess. Analyze, deconstruct, unpick, tear apart the resource with T, similarities, differences, and with extremes. Then once you've done that, make your argument in the terms of evaluate. One side, the other side, okay, both Peel paragraphs into an overall conclusion. Okay, getting there. I'm going to have a quick drink, okay. I'm not going to edit this, so anything that looks a little bit messy will stay in the video. Quick drink here, then we'll do the last section, and then we're over. Okay. All right, on to section C. Now, I've already mentioned this various times, and I'm doing it on purpose to drum it in. There is two sections to C. You've got section C1 and section C2. These are 18 marks each, and they are 20 minutes. That's how long you should be spending on these. At the start of the exam, clock how long it is until you have 40 minutes left. And at 40 minutes left, that's when you should be starting C1 and then moving on to C2. I would write on my exam paper when I should be on C1. Okay, literally work out 40 minutes before the end, write it down, get on to C1. Again, it asks you to answer question 8 or 9, okay? And it asks you to put a cross in the relevant section. My geographers, you're doing question 9, that's about rivers. If you went to a coast and you're watching this from outside my school, then that's question 8. Show you what this looks like. And go to Internet Explorer. Let's have a look at the exam. Right, so here it is. This is section C1. We can see that here. And it asks you to put a cross in the relevant box. So if you've done course, you do 8, but you'll see that it looks very similar. So have a look at this resource that starts section 8. And then look at this. This is section 9. And this is about rivers. It says it. So my geographers, you X this box. But look, the resource looks very similar to the coastal one. The questions are very similar. But clearly, if you're not done course, you can't answer them. I'm pointing that out to make sure you choose the relevant section. My geography is section 9. If you did course, you do section 8. Now, come back here. Now, what I want to point out is why fieldwork matters. Now, we know it's actually the section with the most marks on this exam. Okay, so that's important. It's worth the most marks out of the 3 sections. Give me a sec. Struggling here. No, just give me a second whilst I log into this. Okay, here we go. So we know that this is worth the most marks and it's the section that you should spend the most time on, 40 minutes. Now, in the exam last summer, so this is 2018, if I was to look at how well our cohort did, so that's all the students that actually answered this section, this is software that is provided by the exam board, Edexcel, and it's called Results Plus. And here it shows me as a teacher how well our students did on all the different exam questions. If I go to paper 2, it tells me whether our students were above or below national average. So this is the average score. So here, average score on this 8 marker was 3.55. So basically average was 3 marks out of 8. And our students did marginally better than that on question 4. Okay. Now, I can then break this down into the different sections. And if I click on here and I go to rivers, you can see over here that I'll just circle it here. You can see it says that the Edexcel average was 29% for rivers. Okay, so that on average, that's how well people did on that section. Okay, my point here is that fieldwork, we did above national average, but not by much. But fieldwork was the poorest done section, and I think it's threefold. 3 reasons why. Reason 1 is that students just don't apply much revision time to fieldwork. That's part of the problem. 2, the second problem is understanding of how to answer the questions. Okay, and third one is maybe teachers actually preparing you properly. So I'm hoping that through this video, I'm helping with the preparation. 2, that'll help you understand the questions more. And 1, that ultimately you realize how important this section is. This section is the most important on this paper. You must know your fieldwork. Now, before we go any further into looking at this, I want to outline what you need to know and what you've got to help you with fieldwork, because we know it's important. So how can you help yourselves? First off, resources. I've provided you, or your teacher, class teacher will provide you with your case study booklet. We should have been actively using this, and for this section, you will have been revising from this booklet, Holderness Coastline here, and we've given you some potential questions you would get on that, so you should be revising this. If you're from another school, whatever your coastal named example is, located example, you should be revising. You also need to know an example of a river flooding and what caused it to flood physically and human factors. For my geographers, that's the River Parrett in the Somerset Levels winter flooding of 2014. Must know that. And again, we've given you some potential exam questions and structures to answer it, revise it. And then again, for this exam, most important one is those 2 4 markers on Birmingham towards the end of section B, which means that you must revise all of this. And for my geographers, again, we broke down all these potential 4 markers. If you're not from our school, this can be purchased in the YouTube video information. And then lastly, at the back of this, we've broken down your fieldwork. So here you've got your Carter Mill Valley information, and then Nuneaton is here as well. So this is the most important subject knowledge that you must revise. Okay. On top of that, I'm just going to go through all your options here. If you go to the revision guide, and in the revision guide, the purple revision guide, I've just posted noted here. If you come to we've got page 65. Move that there. So what I've got here is investigating rivers, and you've got page 64 and page 65. And we turn this over, we've got more on investigating rivers. Let's just make that a bit wider. There we go. Investigating rivers, and this is page 66. Must know that, okay? So that's 3 pages on rivers. Don't skip that in your revision. Look at it, revise it. Next, if you go to page 77, we've got investigating dynamic urban areas. Again, there's 1, 2, 3 pages to page 79. Must revise that. Now, if you're from a different school, you will find rural, okay, within this and course. But my geographers, those pages, revise them. Lastly, I recommend everyone revises the skills section at the back of this booklet for this paper. Again, we've spoken about how AO3 and AO4 are so important to this exam. There's pages on skills here that I recommend all of you look at, but mainly is this double spread on different types of graphicacy. So over here, from line charts to histograms, pyramids down to floor line, choropleth maps came up as a question in paper 1 of the 2019 exam. This here helps you with those questions that ask you about data presentation, and especially for C1 and C2 of fieldwork. You need to know advantages and disadvantages of these different types of graphs, graphicacy. Revise this. Other than that, to help, if you go to, let's go to here, if you go to BBC Bite Size and hit on geography, not German, smooth, let's go back, geography. Wow, we're 67. Hour and a half in already. This is going to be a long one. So, my geographers, Edexcel, well, you should only be watching this if you are doing Edexcel. We're doing Edexcel B. BBC Bite Size is the best resource, in my opinion, for the skills, okay? It's got Introduction to Fieldwork Skills. Click that. And it goes through the inquiry process. There's a video on it here. Watch it. And there's also tests, okay? I would do the tests on this, okay? If you go back, none of this is on Seneca. So if you're someone who uses Seneca, they don't have anything on fieldwork on that. There's also cartographic skills here. There's a section on graphical skills and qualitative and quantitative data. Now, that is super important to fieldwork. So basically, there's a video here that explains it. And again, there's tests. I would rinse and repeat these tests on this entire geographical skills section here. So you've got 5. There's only a handful of pages on each, but I would be doing that before this exam. Last bit of help here. Go to the HLS Geography channel, hit playlists, and two playlists here. One, you've got a geography skills playlist. There's 21 videos in there. Don't expect you to watch them all. Just go down the list and pick out any videos on something that you don't understand. Okay, so here, I'm happy with scale. I'm happy with sketch maps, but I don't know how to read weather maps. So I would watch that. Well, I do, but I'm trying to be a student yet. So go down the list, and if there's anything you don't quite understand, watch it. But mainly before paper 2, I would go to this playlist here, GCSE Geography Fieldwork. Now, I've only put 5 videos in here. First one is the difference between quantitative and qualitative. Must know that. I've got one about the difference between primary and secondary data here. Third one about the different types of sampling. These are super important. And then lastly, the 2 at the end here. This one is all about the Environment Agency flood risk maps, which is a piece of your secondary data that everyone across the country has to do for rivers and coast. Watch this. And then there's another video on the index of multiple deprivation. Now, it uses the Scottish one, which is very similar to the English one. It's the best video I could find. But this, again, the index of multiple deprivation is the secondary source the exam boards say everyone has to refer to in their human fieldwork. So watch this as well. Okay, let's go back to this. So we're going to do two pieces, two sections, C1, C2. Again, my geographers, question 9, rivers, question 10, dynamic urban areas, Cardigan Valley and Nuneaton. Now, the fieldwork questions only assess AO3 and AO4. So there's no AO1 or AO2. What that means is these questions are not about just describing two methods you use in your fieldwork. So it's not going to be, oh, tell me two things you did. It's going to be more, why did you do that? Okay, so it's more about you showing your application of knowledge and you showing skills here. And I mentioned this earlier, there's two types of fieldwork questions. What they call familiar fieldwork questions, which is what you did, and unfamiliar, which is what others have done. So there'll be questions that are about familiar fieldwork, what you did, and questions where they give you information about what other students have done that the exam board has created, and they expect you on those unfamiliar questions to use what you've learned by doing fieldwork to answer those questions. Okay, again, all about skills, AO4, and applying your knowledge and findings, AO3. Okay, right, before we go any further and before we get onto the 8 markers, there's 2 8 markers here. Let's go through a couple of things. Okay, so we've just learned there that we cannot just say what we did. So I'm going to go to the visualizer, and what I've done here, if we can kind of, I should have messed on with this beforehand, I do apologize. All right, what I've done here is just to kind of map out what they expect you to know for C1 and C2, the section C fieldwork. And if you know all this, what's on this board, this will massively help you with this section. First off, you need to know the inquiry process, okay? And there's 7 stages. Stage 1 is the creation of an inquiry question with hypothesis. And you need to know why. Why were those questions? Why was that question picked? Why were those hypotheses picked? Why were the sites picked? Okay, not just you writing what you did, but why. Okay, make sure you know that. Okay, normally it comes with some sort of theory. So, for example, it might be the Bradshaw model for rivers, or it could be Burgess model for Burgess or Hoyt model for your urban study. 2, methods. Okay, so what it means is, how did you collect your data and why did you collect it like that? The why is the important bit. And also risk assessment. What was your risk assessment? Why did you do it? 3rd one, data. So what data did you collect and why? How did you present it and why? Your analysis. So from your analysis, what did you learn? What conclusions did you create or did you come to? And again, why? And eventually, what was your evaluation of your study and why? The 8 marker is likely to settle around here, or here. So you need to know the whys of the inquiry process. Moving down here, I'm going to look at data, because data, understanding your data will help you, because most of the questions C1 and C2 fall upon data. So what do you need to know? First off, you need to know your primary and your secondary data. So primary is what you personally collected. So for example, you went out and did a questionnaire, okay? Secondary is what someone else has collected. So that's where you've used I don't know, a blog from a website or a book, or in this case, for courses. Well, we'll get into this in a second, sorry. So secondary, someone else collected it. Now, there's two types of primary that you will collect: quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is numerical, it's number based, and you must know for the exam one quantitative numerical piece of data you did yourself, and you need to know the positives and the negatives to that piece of data collection. You also need to know a piece of qualitative. That's descriptive. It's not numerical. For example, it's more about people's opinions or feelings. So the difference here would be descriptive here. Qualitative is like making a sketch, taking a photograph, interviewing questionnaires. You need to know one of these for the exam and its positives and negatives. And what I mean by that is you need to know this for C1, which is physical, rivers, if you're one of my geographers, and you need to know this again for C2, which is the urban or rural study. For my geographers, Nuneaton urban. So basically, for rivers, my geographers, you need to know one quantitative, one qualitative. My geographers for human, one quantitative, one qualitative. Over here, you also need to know secondary, and you need to know two pieces of secondary, okay? And the two pieces are for question 8 or 9, your physical. For this, you need to know about the environmental agency flood risk map, and you know the positives and negatives of it, okay? So that there is one piece of secondary. Now, my geographers, you also looked at Zoopla, at house prices as well. Take that away, sorry. So for my geographers, we also looked at the National Trust blog. So here, you definitely need to know the environmental agency flood risk map and the positives and negatives of it. And remember, we also did the National Trust blog. Over here, for human, question 10 or 11, for my lot, question 10, your urban Nuneaton study, you must know the index of multiple deprivation and the positives and negatives of using it, okay? It's all about this here. The positive and negatives are where the marks are going to go. Lastly, in terms of the data, you need to understand sampling. Now, what we mean by sampling is, as an example, for my geographers, when we did Nuneaton, we looked at 2 areas of Nuneaton and we focused it on 2 streets, okay? Now, the reason we did that is we were trying to compare the quality of life in 2 places. Now, that is the frame, the sampling frame. So the frame being the population we're looking at. So if we try to pick out 2 wards, 2 areas in Nuneaton, right, and we try to compare the quality of life, so the population of those 2 areas, those 2 wards, that's what I call my sampling frame. The problem is I do not have enough time, or you didn't have enough time to do all of that area. You don't physically have the time to cover every street and interview and questionnaire everybody in that area. So that is why we sample. We take a snapshot of the frame, of those areas, okay? So sampling is where we go. We can't do everything here, all right? And therefore, we're going to take a snippet, a snapshot. But we need to think about the snapshot we take. How are we going to collect data on that snapshot? And is that snapshot going to fairly represent, okay, the entire population, or that sampling frame that we're making decisions on, we're drawing conclusions from? And there's 3 ways we can go about sampling: random sampling, systematic sampling, and stratified. Here's some quick way to remember this, okay? All of you have done field work, and if I said to you, was the fieldwork you went on, your geography fieldwork, better or worse than you thought? Imagine I've got 30 students in class, okay? Now, one way I could sample all 30, let's say I don't have time to talk to every student. So 30 would be the sampling frame, that entire population that I'm trying to draw conclusions from. And let's say I don't have time to interview them all. I've only got a couple of minutes in class. So one thing I could do is I could sample them, take a snapshot, a snippet systematically, and I could question them, sample them, collect data in a system. That's what we mean by systematic. Come up with a system to collect data and sample on. So I could say every 5th student. So I would go around the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th student. Was it better or worse than you thought? Yes or no? Then I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next student, better or worse than you thought? Then again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next student. And then I would collect that sampling, that data, that would be my sample, and I've collected it systematically. There are positives and negatives to doing sampling like this. Another way is stratified. That's where we take the population. Here, it's 30 students, so that's our frame, okay? And again, let's say I didn't have the time. So another way I could do it is by putting the frame, the population, into categories. So let's do it via males and females, okay? Very quickly, males, hands up, yes, did you like the fieldwork? Was it better than you thought? Hands up, no, it was worse than you thought. Females, hands up, yes, it was better than you thought. No, it was worse than you thought. Or I could do it via age, okay? Split the class into 3 age groups. Those born in autumn term, those born in spring term, those born in summer term. And again, I could question via categories. That's stratified. It again has positives and negatives. Last one, random sampling. Random sampling is where we, as it says, randomly, okay, pick from a population, from a frame to sample, but it has to be done randomly. It can't just be you walking about and just randomly picking people. So the way I taught my class to do it is by using a random number generator. So on a phone, there's an app, and on the app you would put in from 1 to 30. And let's say, back to my classroom example, I numbered students 1 to 30. I then, on my random number generator, or I could just have a table of 30 numbers, I randomly choose a number, or I randomize it on my phone app, and whatever number comes up, I ask that student. Random, number 27, was it better or worse than you thought? Random, number 2, better or worse? Random, number 8, better or worse? Again, this also has positives and negatives. Now, in terms of those positives and negatives, I've got some examples here for you. And again, in the exam, you need to know this. So, our random sampling, the advantage is it gives you a high degree of representativeness. That basically means it represents the population or the frame very well. Okay, it's covering that population. Disadvantage is it can be time consuming and tedious to carry out. Okay, systematic sampling again gives a high degree of representativeness, and there's no need to use random number tables or random number generators. Disadvantage, less random, okay, than doing random sampling, obviously. So it's not as random, okay, a little bit more bias creeps in. Last one, stratified, again, gives us a high degree of representativeness because it's shown us the different layers of a population. But this is time consuming and tedious to carry out. Other way to look at this, we've got a sample down here. Random advantages, it's very good for smaller populations, but it becomes very time consuming to carry out for larger populations. Systematic is very quick and easy to check for errors. Okay, but the problem is that whatever system you design, so the periodic cycles within that system, okay, may produce some inaccurate data. So let's say you were surveying every 5th house, and it just happens to be every 5th house was the best house on that street. the periodic cycle or system of every 5 house has led to like less inaccurate data, because the likelihood is if you did every house, okay, you probably find that not every house is as nice. Okay, so just be aware of that. Lastly, with stratified, it's very good to show different layers of a population. Okay, all right then, get in there. So last thing I want to do then is to go through this fieldwork section on the actual paper, and then we're done. Okay, let's move back over to the visualizer. Discard that. Let's check where we're at time-wise. Ouch. Okay, visualizer here. Right, we're going to try get us through this fieldwork section. So let's skip to fieldwork. All right. So this is just looking at question 9, and all I wanted to point out here is one of these questions. So question I've got here is, so I'm just picking out some of the key fieldwork questions I wanted just to explore. We've got suggest 2 factors which should have been considered when choosing the fieldwork locations. It's suggest, so you go about it like explain, but you've got to start your points from the resource. We've mentioned this. Because it's like explain, we're going to do point develop. I'm going to develop our points using our key phrases. And our key phrases being this leads to, this means that, as a result. 4 marks, it asks for 2. So we've got 1, 2. So we're going to do 2 develop points. I'm going to start with firstly and then secondly. Said that weird. All right. Down here, we've got a 4 marker, and you'd be tempted here to try to do what I've just said up here. But look, it's describe. And it said describe the results of the student's fieldwork shown in figure 9. This is figure 9. These are the answers. This is the data. So in describe, we do not explain. Do not explain, nor key phrases. If you develop points with key phrases and try to explain the data, explain the result, you're not going to get any marks here. All they want you to do is here to basically point out, describe the results and support it with evidence twice. That's it. So point out something from the results, support it with evidence, do that twice. Here, this is from the exam board. And you can see that this student has picked out something about the results from the resource. So figure 9 suggests that the further upstream you go in boulder clay, higher the gradient will be. And then they've supported that. For example, the average gradient for location 1, boulder clay, was 5.5 degrees, and the gradient at site 1 was 70 degrees, whereas at site 8 it was 3 degrees. This suggests a decrease in gradient as you go downstream. So they've made a point about the student's results, and then they've described said point using detail from the resource. And then they've done the same for their second point. So this here would be description of results supported with evidence, 2 marks. You do it again here and here. That's your 4 marks. Okay. Okay, moving on. All right. Second last thing to go through. Question here. We've got using an annotated sketch map, explain how you chose your site or location for data collection. I'm just going to show you from the exam board what they're after, because this is a confusing question. They literally want you to use a form of data presentation, okay, and explain it. So this here is the student showing why they chose their two sites, and this is their urban study.